Welcome back to Serious Talk, Agentic AI. I'm Greg Banks, your host. Thanks for coming along. If you've ever watched a project sail through discovery, glide through build, and then hit a wall when you reach UAT because the client finally saw the thing and said, wait, that's not what I pictured, this conversation is for you. Al and Gavin are back, and we're getting into the POC-first delivery model. How agentic tooling has collapsed the cost of building an interactive proof of concept. Why that flips the whole consulting economics, and what it means for fixed bid contracts, vendor selection, and the role of expertise on top of the AI output. We get real practical about four things: where POC first replaces describe first, what's actually doing the work under the hood, how the delivery model shifts left, and where AI generated mockups can mislead you if no expert is in the loop. All right, let's get into it. All right, good to have Al and Gavin back today on a really awesome Agentic AI episode. This is something that we've been not just looking into, but we've been walking the talk, I think is the way to say it. This is definitely something that's changed the lives of people here at Sirius. And so we're going to talk about the POC first mindset, building proofs of concept as opposed to sales generating a long scope of work and whatnot. And my background actually came out of architecture. And I was just thinking back over my life of, I don't care if you're building a house, a motorcycle, or just running a project, there's always more dreams than there is budget or time. It's just the facts. And oftentimes, I think it's because you may have in your mind where you're going as the executor of it, but the client doesn't know. They don't know what it looks like. So this whole concept of proof of concept is the sooner the client can see something, the sooner you're going to resonate and be on the same page. And just when you get to that place, project work's a lot more fun. So I know you guys have just totally nerded out on this. The artifact on this that we're going to share is going to be fantastic. But Gavin, why don't you kick us off? Why don't you kind of start by defining, how we've gotten here and why we need this?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for having us on. This has been a topic that we've been looking forward to covering. I know Al's made a lot of moves internally to really push POCs forward. So like you said, Greg, it's something we have a lot of experience with here at Sirius. But yeah, POCs have been around pretty much since development has existed, but they've been difficult to work into the pipeline. And we're seeing that barrier kind of fall apart as AI comes into the forefront, and it's changing how we do our delivery model. So Al, can you talk a little bit about why we're seeing a change in conviction or confidence in POCs today and how it's impacting the model that we have?
Yeah, definitely. So especially in consulting, proof of concepts were always an amazing idea that were extremely difficult to execute on because the amount of time and energy it takes to build a proof of concept is unbelievably high in terms of the amount of results that it delivers. It might meaningfully move a project forward, but it takes half of your budget to actually build one out in weeks upon weeks. So ultimately, companies ended up turning to other tools like Lucid, like drawing out Visios to be able to show what a process might theoretically look like, doing a wireframe mockup. And that moves the needle to a certain extent. But still, there's a gap there that's very hard to close because ultimately, people can't visualize what they're seeing and how they'll actually use what's on a static piece of paper or a static screen. So, we're looking for different ways. I think every company is looking for different ways to close that gap and ultimately deliver something that can push a project forward, show what the ultimate value and scope will be, and not suck up half of the budget and half of the time to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, the budget's the key there because POCs have always been, we've had the capability of doing them, but years ago we would have projects where we come into a one engagement, we start the build phase and they say, hey, we want to do a POC first mentality. And what that typically does is just eat up budget for the build phase, but particularly when you start to narrow down who it is you get it in front of the POC, right? Because you still end up having those back-end UAT increases in project size and scope. So yeah, definitely a big change there. And I think that talks a little bit more to the idea of why POCs are so powerful in the release sequence, right? And how cost increases the longer we wait to show what we're building.
Yeah, typically we would have to wait until demos and a UAT phase to really show a client what they were actually paying for. And that's a huge amount of time that goes by without being able to really shift and move. A lot of the time, I think we would show demos to clients and they would see bits and pieces of the process and not really understand how everything fits together. but they have faith that their consultants know what they're doing. They know better than, we do because we don't work in the system all the time. And that trust would ultimately get shattered if what they were handed at the end of the project was not exactly what they were expecting. So that's a huge risk that we always run, and you're always kind of rolling the dice. You hope that you show the right things and that you get people to really understand what you're putting out there. But I've been to so many projects where everybody in the room is speaking English, and yet we're speaking two different languages. We're speaking a very technical language on one side, and we're speaking a very industry-focused language on the other side. And trying to make those two things match is almost impossible to do if you can't see and point and touch something and agree on what that actually is.
Yeah, we're starting to already see this have impacts, right? So we're able to showcase what it is we're building. And then by the time it gets to UAT, there's no surprises. We're also seeing it have impacts in the pre-sales operations, right? So we go in and we say, based off of the conversations that we've had, this is what we think this is going to look like. So that brings the cost, further down the line and gives you less risk. Really, POC driven is all about risk mitigation the further out you go.
Exactly. If we can handle the issues, if we can handle the hard conversations at the beginning of an engagement, when we still have time, we still have money, that's so much easier to work through than trying to sort those things out at the very end when you're just about to go live. The customer thinks they're showstoppers. That's when things get very dicey. So we want to try to move that as far to the left in the project as possible and try to burn our energy early on rather than at the very end.
Yep, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit about the POC first versus describe first? Because I do still think we've got kind of our feet on both sides of the door, essentially. So I've seen not just consulting firms, but in general, when we talk about areas where we want to use POC first mindsets, but we still come in with what I would consider storytelling devices.
Definitely. So, coming in with decks, coming in with user stories, with epics, with features, these are things that tell a story typically using our language. So consulting language that we understand. Even really good business analysts have a very hard time putting things into formats that customers can really understand completely. Ultimately, you're talking to them in a language that you speak every day doing this job. And it's very hard to get that to resonate with somebody who just does not do this on a daily basis. They're working in their industry. They're speaking a very specific set of terms, and trying to make those two things match is you almost never get it completely right. It's very rare. It takes a really gifted storyteller to really get the point across to somebody who just doesn't understand the way that you're speaking about things. So being able to show something that's interactive really is what changes the game here. If you can bring it up on your computer, you can click on it, you can see how something works, even if it's just a presentation. We're seeing that now, turning a PowerPoint deck into an HTML mockup where you can actually click through different tabs to walk through a story step by step is a huge difference in terms of being able to relate that to an individual.
Yeah, the HTML mockup has been something that's blown my mind over the past couple months. I know that Git's loving it. Everything's, they're seeing a lot more volume transactions with people moving to POCs because they want to be able to share these POCs with other people outside of their organizations. So yeah, that's been an incredible change. And I would also say too, when it comes to POC building, we found that the most benefit we have is in front end design, right? So
absolutely.
We do Salesforce consulting, but our POC mockups are typically just front-end web pages is what we're sharing that look and iterate like Salesforce so they have an understanding of the product and they can play around with it. So typically what I would say that the tagline here on how you determine what's described first versus POC first is if changing the artifact would change someone's understanding of what you're actually building, that's when it's POC first, right? Making an edit in a PowerPoint, something that they can't interact with, that's not necessarily going to be groundbreaking. But if they can get in and start clicking buttons and say, hey, I would actually like this component to look slightly differently, that's where you start to move into the power of POCs. So let's talk a little bit about where we can apply some of these POCs, because obviously largest stakeholder of this is in development, right? So as consultants, that's been a huge win for us, is being able to take the ideas in our head, put it into POCs, get in front of the client. But what are some other places where we need to be thinking POC first?
So I think the key thing we want to think through here is static versus dynamic. So putting something into a PDF format that somebody kind of scrolls through and looks at is different from, if you're in marketing, being able to actually build a landing page and have somebody be able to click through and see what happens, see the dynamic movements as I click one button and something else opens up. That's a huge change in the way that an actual end user will be interacting with something. Same thing with presentations. We send read aheads now often that are actually clickable dynamic forms that a client can look through and actually see content rendered dynamically in that page. So it's really incredible. And of course, we are in the software development area. So anything that we can show an actual working slice of a customer's org is huge, because now I'm not just hearing about something or seeing it in my mind or on a wireframe. I can actually get in, open something in my browser and click through the different tabs, different options, different automations. It's really changes everything.
Yeah. And the other place that we have really positive gains with POCs is things like the pre-sales process, particularly in the fixed bid area. In the consulting world, time and material has been very dominant. We've moved, a lot of consulting firms have moved into managed service-based contracts, and fixed bid's always kind of been a little more scary, right? Because you have that scope creep. But with POCs, you start to alleviate some of that fear, because you can showcase in the pre-sales process exactly what's being delivered. And so that's something to look out for, is how can you, in any sort of selling model, how can POCs be used to, one, enhance your capability of selling, but two, alleviate some of the fear of end of contract and the entire contract lifecycle. I would also say, if you're somebody that is in charge of acquiring new software for your company, definitely use this in vendor selection, or even whatever software is being showcased to you. Say, I would love to see a POC or a mock-up of the competitors that you're working with, because these vendors should be able to deliver that today in an AI-driven world.
And not just a generic demo of a generic org that doesn't actually mirror some level of your business processes. I think that's the differentiator. Anybody can show a very simple demo and plug in a couple of names, but it's all out-of-the-box functionality. There's no customization to show anything for the way that your operation works. And I think that's what would really separate out vendors from each other.
Yeah, and as vendors, this is all very dangerous for us to say. That's how confident we are that we're putting more of that technical earnest on vendors, because you need to be able to deliver those POCs and have those capabilities. That's the expectation, the bar now, I would say. So how has POCs shifted the delivery model since we started implementing it at Sirius?
Yeah, definitely. So before, up until now, we would spend as little time as possible on discovery. We would try to stretch out a meager budget, get as much information as we could, use that to build user stories, present those to a client, and hope that they understood what they were reading. I think a lot of the time we would get a head nod and, yeah, that looks fine. And there would be a gap in understanding there that we wouldn't understand until we actually reveal the product. So you'd spend most of your time building out that were a little bit vague, trying to make sure that you got it right, demoing as you went along, reworking as you heard feedback, and then you reveal and hope that things are in line with what the customer expects. After we're shifting to this model, we're moving the effort to the left. So, my personal thought is around 60% of a project's going to be doing the discovery and design process, because ultimately we need to understand everything about the business, and we need to be able to build out full business processes as proof of concepts that a customer can then interact with and see and approve. And if we get that approval, now we're building to a spec rather than building to a bunch of written requirements. That spec, that, actual handoff of, hey, I saw this, I touched it, I felt it, it looked good, it felt right, things were in the right place, is a massive change from doing that. It's that you guarantee there's some level of misunderstanding within them. So really, the effort is up front. The build is much smaller. UAT should just be basically a rubber stamp and just confirming that everything works properly, not that it's doing the right things. And that's the biggest difference. UAT in the past has always been, well, does it even meet my requirements? Does it actually do the things I want? If it doesn't, that's an expensive and a hard change to make at the very end of an engagement when time and money are short.
Yeah, and I would say it's not only effort that moves left to the earlier side, right? It's confidence. It's really good from our side as vendors when we say, hey, this is what you're going to get. And they really like it up front, or really like the fact that we're able to deliver it so quickly.
Exactly. And if they don't like it, we can iterate and we can get it to the point where they like it, which is amazing to do that before the very end of an engagement where you're really struggling to justify more time or more money to get something done.
Yeah, it's a much easier conversation to have week 1 and 2 than it is week 12 when they don't like it.
Exactly.
And it's a whole lot better that I can't think of a single project that we've done in the years I've been here. You get to UAT and you don't spend half the UAT period showing them how the thing works. Like they don't even get to test it because they're still trying to get the foundational understanding of what the product is. And until they understand that, they can't even begin to look around and know if all the bells and whistles are there yet. So
exactly
what we typically would find out there is y'all didn't tell us about that. So going back to the user stories, like they start with the big blocks, the big things that ring bells that they touch every day. What they rarely remember to tell us are those little details that actually move the needle in their business process of, when does that trigger something in their business process? And they didn't bring that up. So yeah, to your point, the closer you get to that finish line, the more expensive and risky it gets to try and back up and do some of those other processes.
So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I'm curious, like, what are the actual elements that you're seeing out that are making POCs not only possible, but basically required from a technical delivery side?
Absolutely. So we are typically an Anthropic shop here. We use all the tools, if they really move the needle. But ultimately, we're using a lot of Claude code as just a very powerful system to be able to generate the back end of POCs, build out data models and schemas, some pretty incredible structures. And then Claude Design is a new tool that works front end really, really well. And is actually, so these tools being so easy to use now, if you're an expert, and that's the important thing, if you're an expert in the software that you're trying to emulate, these are incredible tools. If you can validate that the output is correct, that it will actually be technically feasible. These things now are so fast to use for people that are experts at this that now we can condense down the amount of time it would take to build an actual interactive POC and iterate on 2 hours, which is much, much lower than we ever could have if you're actually going in and building physical functionality into a test org and having to then iterate, and just the click paths, the amount of time it takes to process changes is incredibly high.
Yeah. And I will say too, if you're not an Anthropic shop, let's say you're OpenAI shop, that's totally fine too. These are tools. Codex is very similar to how Claude Code is implemented. A lot of the things that are being released are kind of mirrored of each other. So don't worry if you have some sort of vendor lock-in or have your team on one or the other. These are things, POCs can be done utilizing multiple AI providers. And really what has evolved is the tools, not necessarily the LLMs. I remember even last year, I was working on API calls to some of these vendors, some of these LLMs to try and build POCs. What was required back then was combining multiple LLM outputs and having LLMs grade each other in order to get the correct, the token usage was massive in order to get the correct, what your output is, right? And I had all of this running on a virtual machine. Now these tools exist and they're way more powerful than that. They don't require that many LLM calls. They only require one vendor to be able to operate. So things like Claude Code, things like Codex, that's really been an unlock on being able to deliver those POCs. Something that was locally on your machine can push things up to a Git repo to share it across people in your organization and outside your organization.
Exactly. Yeah, I tell my teams all the time that the hardest it's ever going to be to use these tools is today. It's only going to get easier as time goes by.
Very true. Very true. What are some of the other factors outside of the tool usage, specifically on the consulting side? How have we seen like contract changes and expectations change that are kind of pushing POCs to the forefront?
So I think in the past, T&M was always the consistent model that people went to because it offered a lot of protections really to each side if those issues came to bear with being able to translate information between parties. Now I think we're moving to an outcome-based or service contract-based model in general, where you're going to be billed up front for something that you're going to be getting over time. And you're going to have a really good idea early on in the process what you're actually going to be receiving by the end of that engagement, however it's structured. So I think there will be more probably fixed bid style contracts, and also a lot of service contract style contracts that will be more prevalent as we move into this model deeper.
Right. Yep. And it's been really interesting to watch that evolution, because AI in general is making things cheaper across the board from delivery.
Exactly.
So a lot of times we're seeing, when it comes to project engagement, even when we do POC first, the T&M model is becoming less beneficial to both sides of the contract, right? A lot of times we're waiting on client requirements for a lot larger percentage of the engagement than we are through the build process. So
absolutely,
I do think in general, we've seen in the consulting ecosystem and the software development ecosystem, just a general shift away from time and material, and POC first methodology is kind of opening up that strong path of deliverables, conceptually fixed bid, but even within regular contracts, what we're really aligning to is deliverables. So can you talk a little bit about, I know we did a quick comparison earlier on the describe first, POC first, but when it comes to things like what's the audience experiencing, decision velocity, rework, what are some of the comparisons you're seeing there?
So in the past, like we said, when you first experience the software in the older model is typically at UAT, during demos, at the launch. So you're talking at the very end of a project. Now we're moving that as early as possible, iterating and showing the process as we start to learn it, as we start to onboard that information, taking inputs from meetings where we're actually gathering requirements and feeding those directly in to be able to produce interactive POCs very early on. So that's happening as early as possible. Same thing with overall decisions. It's hard to make decisions on something that you're only visualizing in your head or through a static document. You really don't know until you see it and you interact with it if something is actually moving in the right direction. So being able to get higher decision velocity is probably one of the biggest benefits that we have. That's really where we struggle the most. It's always that people aspect is somebody doesn't want to make a call if they don't think they're making the right call. They want to feel that confidence. So moving that confidence early as possible. And then rework now is so much simpler because we're iterating on an HTML file, basically. It's a much simpler thing to change, to add to remove, than going in and actually, removing fields or objects or automations in a live system, changing code in real time. Those things are much harder, much riskier. Now we're doing all of that in a way that's very plastic. And then we talked about predictability, that ultimately you are going to understand what you're going to get as soon as you approve those POCs early on. You're not approving a written document and then hoping that what you receive at the end of an engagement is going to meet your expectations, which is absolutely huge. And then ultimately, I think when you're looking at vendors, when you're looking at people to provide services and they're going to build a software platform for you, they're going to give you a digital transformation, you want to not ask, hey, who has the cheapest proposal? Whose proposal looks best? You want to ask, okay, who can build me a proof of concept and show me what the future actually looks like? Not give me a generic demo or give me a generic deck. Show me my future and walk me through that. And I think that's going to be able to give you the confidence that you're making the right decision, regardless of if somebody's willing to throw a very low cost out, but it's very cloudy what the future ultimately looks like and if you're going to reach your goal.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll call out too, one of the big differences I see in the describe first, POC first, as someone with a developer background, it is incredible to be able to start a user story with a POC, right?
Amazing.
So, yeah, you're not only, hey, this is the describe of what's going on and what we expect you to build. This is what it looks like. And then you work with AI to build it, and the quality that you get out and the speed in which you can iterate it on it's incredible compared to here's just a user story that could be disjointed. And you could even back it up to, you can use POCs to generate user stories and then apply those POCs and the user stories in the development process. Which is where you really start to see dev cycle shortening and the speed of delivery increase.
Yeah, that's the full loop.
So where are we seeing the POCs highlight areas that we need to improve, and where do you see, where does this go? I know you've already mentioned this quite a few times, but what's the expectation now of people purchasing vendors, people working on software? Where's that bar?
I think the expectation is that you can show me what my future likes explicitly as close as possible to what reality will be. I do think a danger here that I want to call out is that LLMs and, these tools will make you anything. They will create whatever you want. They'll fulfill your wildest fantasy. But it takes an expert to know if what you're building through these tools is actually achievable in real life. And, we've actually had clients now who have created their own POCs, their own mockups, and come to us with them. And then we have to do the work of trying to take what they've built and show them what can actually be done within the software platforms they purchased. So I think there is still something important here in terms of expertise and bringing the right people on. I think a lot of companies will ask, well, why don't I just do this myself and I'll just build everything in my own, system? There's a lot more to it than that. And ultimately, we can build a beautiful mock-up. We can make an interactive, piece of front-end software, but it's not real. It doesn't actually do the things you need it to in the long run. So we have to validate these things. And ultimately, I think the POC is better than anything else. It acts as a validation tool for what you want to have happen. And if we can validate it through something you can interact with and click through and, confirm with your teams that it looks good, then experts can go in and build those things very quickly. But we do want to make sure that people understand it does require a layer of expertise to build the right things.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I know this is a conversation me and you have multiple times a week. We've had situations, this just as an example in Salesforce development, we'll have people deliver POCs to us and say, this is what we would like out of Salesforce. And when we drill down into it, it's all custom components. It's capable to do within Salesforce, but then we go back and say, is this really the direction you want to head? That's a lot of code to manage within your org. And that's a big departure from what we typically push for on projects.
Exactly.
So just situations like that where it does take that expert guided hand to say, I'm looking at this POC. Here's how we can shift how it looks slightly in order to make it more reasonable and scalable.
Exactly. Our goal is always to leverage out of the box functionality to its absolute limit, because that's what you're paying for ultimately with licensing. You're paying for the platform. You're paying for those capabilities. You can go a fully custom route, but do you always have to? If you don't have to, get what you paid for first, and then go custom with anything that can't be covered with the out-of-the-box functionality. And generally, when we build POCs, we're building to an MVP. So we're really trying to give minimum viable product with out-of-the-box functionality to its absolute limit. And then we'll go custom with anything that cannot be done for sure with something out of the box.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think POC-driven development is doing is changing where the spotlight is on the delivery process. So what I mean by that, from the vendor side of the house, this means that our processes are more important than our capacity now, right? Do we have that POC user story delivery model intact throughout our company, right? Because that's where we see the real efficiency gains occur. Not do we have every single person, aligned to like how many specific hours does this POC need, and do we have the hours aligned to it? That's becoming less important than the actual operation model. I also think that we've been seeing this for quite a few years, especially on the dev team. It's been pretty apparent for the last few years is POCs are pushing for a different style of communication with the client. So it's no longer, hey, I've been able to write user stories, I've been able to write epics, let's go and review a Excel spreadsheet to get it approved. That's now a demo. So you're shifting that skill set, that demo skill set kind of needs to be adopted by anyone who's working on these POCs and presenting these POCs early and often.
Absolutely. And I'll say one last thing, that this is a really demanding model on customers. It's interesting when you work in consulting, you kind of forget that this is your full-time job, but it's not your customer's full-time job. So they have a lot of other tasks on their plate. They have other projects to manage. And we're going to ask a lot from them to give us as much information as possible so we can build a really nice functional POC. And then we have to make the rounds validating, and we have to make the iterating. So there is a lot of upfront expectation for engagement that if the client has a hard time meeting that, we're going to have a hard time maximizing the value of the POC model with them. So we definitely do need to change the expectations up front in terms of meeting time and their engagement with the project.
Man, I can't agree more. I just, in 30 years of doing projects of any kind, in math, we have this term, we always talk about the lowest common denominator. I would say the shift here, it's not a new shift. I think clients have always wanted this, but this is generating an earliest common denominator. This is earlier in the project, you and I can get on the same page and the anxiety goes down. Think about what a T&M timeline used to look like, right? Al, I quote all the time, used to have this phrase that when you're 90% done, you're halfway there. What that basically means is I'm done writing code. Like I'm done loading data. I'm ready to demo, ready for them to go test. And that's when the gremlins come out. Right? That's when all the ideas. I'm finally seeing it now. I've got all kinds of ideas. What we try to do now is move this earliest common denominator where you and I've got this thing. We now, it's defined. It's in the room. We can see it. And man, I got to think back, like just in terms of getting to something that you can lay hands on and know you're there, it's 20, 30, 40, 50 to 1, right? I mean, think about field service. We just did an episode on that a few weeks ago, right?
Oh, yeah.
If somebody wants to see field service work out of the box, man, you're talking 60, 70, 80 hours of setup. If we don't have our accelerator, right? This is why we did that, because we've got to get to that place where you see the thing and we can have more foundational conversations. And the ability now to kind of cut through all that and lay it in front of you. And it may not be right, but for a 50 to 1 cost reduction, I know that. I didn't spend 80 hours setting it up. I spent 5 hours in discovery, 2 hours mocking it up, an hour polishing it, and now you're here. And it just changes the conversation. And I think clients typically would want a lot of time set aside for UAT. And once you do UAT and you know the product's done, then you got to do documentation, then go live and post go live support. There was always so much cost back there. And again, that's where all the risk lived. Now we've moved all that to the front and people, and I think that's why they're more confident with doing a more open-ended kind of feel of a service contract of, I don't have that risk. I'm not fearful of the boogeyman around the corner down there at UAT where I've typically been disappointed. I've seen it earlier. I trust these guys. So yeah, you guys have said it 1,000 different ways and analogies will never end here, but it's a really, really good way to overcome so many things that makes consultant and delivery very dangerous line to tread, so to speak. At the end of the day, you're only as good as your last delivery. You can do 100 great projects, but if you trash one, man, you're done, right? So anything we can do to kind of cut that thing off and make sure that our clients are happy earlier, and then they do what you really want to Salesforce. And we're going to talk about Salesforce in this episode, but with Salesforce, getting live is actually the beginning, right? You got releases coming. Typically, companies that come onto Salesforce have acquisitions, they have restructures. They're not static little companies. They're big, hungry beasts that are out there doing big things. So the sooner you can get to that place is like, okay, now you may come back to Sirius for some more stuff. But man, the skyscraper's going up. We're getting fancier windows. We're doing some really, really cool things that bring high value to my end users that it was just very difficult to do in the old world. So I think this is going to resonate with 1,000 people. It's a topic that anybody who's ever delivered anything, carving out of wood or building software, the last thing you want is a disappointed client. And this is an absolute game changer. We've seen it firsthand for the last several months here of moving to this model. I thank you guys for the time and this artifact. Almost everything that we talked about today is laid out in here with some takeaways that you can go back to your teams and talk about what is you expect delivery companies to do for you. So, gentlemen, once again, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We're going. That's it for another episode of Serious Talk Agentic AI. Big thanks to 𝗷𝗄𝗏 and Gavin Franklin for unpacking something we've genuinely lived through here at Sirius, the move from describe first to POC first delivery. Instead of waiting until 90% complete to find out you've only heard half of the requirements, you get the clients hands-on to something interactive in hours, not weeks. That's where confidence enters the project. That's where you can demolish the gremlins before they can appear. Here's the concrete ask. If you're evaluating a vendor, a platform, or software partner right now, don't ask for the cheapest proposal or the slickest deck. Ask them to build you a proof of concept that reflects your business, not a generic demo. The ones who can do that today are the ones who will deliver on the back end. If this episode helped sharpen how you think about delivery, please subscribe, leave us a review, and pass it along to someone wrestling with a stalled project or a scary fixed bid decision. Show notes and the full Agentic AI playlist are linked below. Please reach out anytime at SeriousTalk@SeriousSolutions.com. Until next time, nobody ever fell in love with a wireframe. Go build the next real thing.